define slicing?
Yes, I can. 3D printing is a bit like if you imagine a conventional printer. I'm assuming you know nothing now. Um,
I know a bit, but
yeah, starting right from base. If you take an ordinary printer
yeah,
and assume it's got thick ink, then what you can do is you can print once on the sheet of paper, then put it through the printer again and get it to print a layer above it. And so what slicing is doing is actually cutting down the entire model into those layers that you're going to print off.
gotcha. Yeah.
Um, there is, I think, again, there's a video knocking about that I made, which explains all about 3D printing and it actually shows somebody 3D printing a building with layers of concrete. It's a bit like an FDM printer, but it's using concrete, and it's the same principle really, except that I go with a resin printer, and it just does one layer at a time.
So there's one of the, I think it's the University of Minneapolis or something, where they 3D print a boat.
Yes,
using a huge
that's right
printer and that, and yeah, yeah. Well, it's moved on a little bit from doing a tiny little print like that, to where you can print a house and
yes
print a boat. So, it's amazing. I mean, I've made some wagons that are printed in wood.
All right, yeah.
So they've got all the grain and everything like that, and when you paint them, they look like they're made out of the material they're intended to be. They're not sort of like plastic or anything like that.
Right. Are you FDM printing or resin?
That's FDM printing. I mean, it makes the downstairs of the house smell rather interesting, as though you've set fire to a tree stump in the dining room, but it's natural, and you can get it all in all different shades, so it's still quite good. But I've got a resin printer downstairs as well.
Yeah, that emanates its own very poignant smells, doesn't it?
Yeah,
which is another reason why it's in the garage.
Yeah, well, sadly we don't have a garage. I've got a shed at the back, but that's where the railway is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Going to be.
Well, mine, as you can see, is surrounding me. It's nothing like the Thurlby layout, and it's in a 10-foot by 12 room.
Yeah.
I should really have gone for double O gauge, but I just like O gauge so much that I just had to do it in O gauge, and I can manage to get a loop in here. It's doing all right. I'm happy with it, and it gives me lots of opportunity for 3D printing.
Yeah. Well, didn't know anything different to O gauge. I went from N gauge to O gauge, and
wow, that's a leap.
Which was a bit of a leap, but I don't know anything different. So we've got a few participants here. John, it says John and Christine Walker and Peter coming in. Chris asked you about the definition of slicing. So to develop that a little bit further, what kind of program do you favor? Because there are loads and loads of slicers available. Which one do you favor?
The printer I bought is an Elegoo printer. In fact, I'm on my third Elegoo printer now, and I like them very much. They're great, but it comes assuming you're going to use something called Chitterbox. Now, Chitterbox there's a free version, and it's all right, and I used it for many years. But I've fairly recently, within the last 12 months, found this Lychee slicer, and I find that a lot easier to deal with. It's a lot. It seems to be more user friendly, really. And again, there's a free version. I tend not to pay for anything because I'm a Yorkshireman, so I pay for nothing. But Lychee slicer is extremely good. Gives you update now and then, and whilst originally everything they were doing was on resin printers, they're now doing slicing for FDM to be honest, I don't know how good the software is on FDM. I think it's probably a bit early for them to do it, frankly. I think they need a few more iterations of the software to be able to come up with a decent slicer for FDM. But certainly, no, it's light cheese slicer for me for all my resin printing work.
Right. Well, I can concur with you there, because I use Lychee as well.
Oh, right.
And I find it very useful. I was going to share my screen to sort of bring it up and show, but it seems to have disappeared off. I changed my laptop recently, got a new one, and it's missing. It's on my old one. I hand my laptops down, so Christina's got my old one.
Let me see if I can load it up for you then.
Yeah, well, if you want to load it up and show it, and share your screen so people can see what it's like, that would be quite a good idea, maybe.
Yeah, let's find something to put into it. Well, I suppose actually, tell you what I'll do. I'll try again. I'm working on something really boring at the moment, which is a barrel. But I've decided that on the layout, I'm going to have a lot of... I can't now open the wrong thing. Oh, hang on. I can go to Open Recent, can't I? Open Recent. Oh, here we go. I'll go with the... just bear with. See, you prepare for these things. It never goes right, does it?
No.
Now, here we go. We're getting there now. We're getting there. Right. Let me just minimize that and then come down to share. And I'm going to share it with that. Right. Do you have on there some images with lots of barrels?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, that's now showing Lychee Slicer. And what there is on here is, and there's a lot of them. So if I go into layout, I'll delete some of those, not all of them. The nice thing about resin printing, as you may well know, is that whereas with an FDM printer, you have to print them off one at a time, with a resin printer, if you can get them all onto the one area on the printer, which is usually quite small, then you can print as many as you want at the same rate. So
that fit, as long as they fit.
Not necessarily. You can bring other files of any sort on, but yes, you can.
Yeah. No, I mean, as long as they all fit on the build plate.
Oh yeah, that's right. As long as it fits on the build plate, you're all right. If not, then you're in trouble. That's a major disadvantage of resin, is that you haven't got a very big build plate to work with. But you can always build things in sections. There's I made some fences up. I don't know if you can see that little panel. That's actually a gate that I made to go on the fence. But you can make up interlocking units and just have rows and rows of fences in this case, so you can just fit things together. But anyway, down to this one. Yes, it's going to be really easy to show you this, because if I get into prepare, so just looking at the top of the screen, there are 3 sections. Layout is when you decide what you're going to do with this thing, where you're going to have it. You can move it, you can rotate it, change its scale, copy it, or in my case, delete a load of them. And there's other tools as well. So that's the layout area. You then move into preparing, and what you do there is that's where you add these supports, and you get a chance to have a look at the slicing. Now, if I just adjust this thing at the bottom here, this is actually, for those of you who haven't got a resin printer, this is actually upside down, because the build plate is on the top of the build, and then you build the thing down from there. So the first layer, we're on layer 4 at the moment. That's layer 1. The first layer is just a disk. So that's your first print. The build plate then lifts off from the resin, goes back down slightly higher, and then you print the next layer, which looks very similar to the first. But you can just see it's a little bit bigger. And if I move up here to a fair lick, you can see it's doing, this is the base of the thing. And then moving on up, we've now started to form the supports. We'll do it a bit faster, and very soon we'll start to make, that's the bottom edge then of this barrel that we're building. It's got a base on it, so that then fills in. So we build up again. And from now on, what you can see is the outside of the barrel. Inside it, I've set it up to produce a little mesh, which is keeping the structure stable. It will also support the top of the barrel when I get to it. But it means I'm not wasting an awful lot of resin, filling up a barrel with resin that I'll never see or use. So moving on up, we'll just keep on going. And eventually we'll get to, just alter that angle a bit. Get to the top, there's the tap hole there, and then the top of the lid. Sure, there's a technical word for the lid, and that's it. So that's all you do. Now that's all done in Lightree, and the next stage is to then go, when you've decided that that's all right, and there are various tests you can make. You can look for islands and things that aren't supported on the print. In a way, this one's a bit strange because I've built it vertically. Generally, everything I print off, I print at an angle because of print. There's benefits in doing that. But this particular thing was easy to print it vertically because everything is basically vertically from the base. So from there, you then go to export. And in export, you get to or produce the final file that goes off to your 3D printer. So those are the three main stages. There's one downside of having the free version of this, and that is that as soon as you press export files, slices to file, it comes up with a little bit of advertising, and you have to sit through that for 30 seconds, which is an irritation, but it's better than paying out money for the purchase version. There's enough in the flexibility of the free version to allow me to do all I want to do. To be honest, I don't think the paid for one's particularly expensive. Just click continue, and now it comes up and asks me for the file that I'm going to save it in, and I find my little disk drive, bung that in, and run it off. So I'd say I just find Lightree a lot easier to deal with than some of the other things.
I've done a lot in Lightree, and it is by far the easiest one that I've found to use. I've tried Shitterbox and other ones, but it is by far the easiest ones to use, and you get good consistent results from it. So
yes, it's very good. You can also, of course, set it up for your particular resin and because everybody's settings are different, even though you use the same resin for some reason.
Chris, what's the reasoning behind the multiplicity of support? Why do you need that many?
Well, the problem is it's the first layer will print, the first slice will print no trouble at all. The second one will be okay because it's sitting on the first. But as you start to get up to things that are, well, let's say you wanted to print the barrel. No, that's a bad example. If you wanted to print, say, something like this bike, which is a thing I've used, this is an example in the video. If you started printing that just like that, I can actually show you what it looks like. There it is with some supports on it. And all well and good, except as you're working your way along, there are things that come along like the mud guards hanging out there. I don't know if you can see that. Hang on, wrong camera. And that's just sort of hanging there. Now, as the printer gets to that, it'll certainly print a layer on the first part of that mud guard, but it's got nothing to hold it there. So it just drifts off into the resin and becomes a problem. So that's what they would call an island. So what you do is have to support that island. And in truth, anything that's horizontal is a real problem because the printer can't print it if it's just hanging in space. But if you tilt it slightly, so something like that, it can print the bottom layer of that. The next layer, it probably can't find it. But if you print it at an angle, it'll print that bit and then the next bit on top, the next bit on top. So it's actually building on itself as you go on up. So they reckon round about 30 degrees tilt is ideal. But in the case of the barrel, of course, it's basically like that. So as you start, once you've got the supports around the bottom to hold the bottom edge in place, and you've also got supports underneath the base to hold that in place. Let me just share again. There it is. So if we look, whoops, go back to prepare. That's it. So if we come down here, now as we go on up, those obviously those are the supports, right? Moving on up, you get, now that layer is a bit of a worry because you've got sections. I don't know if you've got my pointer on there. Can you see my pointer?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. You've got the section between that support, and there's nothing really to support it at that moment. But hopefully there's enough stickiness in the resin to be able to make that layer, make that print that slice. Once you've printed that slice, the next is a good one, and the next, but you see how it's thickening up, and then you then got the base of the barrel. Well, all those supports in the middle there are providing support for that. So you can get away with a little bit of horizontal, but not a lot. And as
those three black circles represent?
Those three, they're holes.
Okay.
Because what I've done is to say I've hollowed the thing out and then put this structure in. If you just hollowed it out, then it would still fill up with resin, or you'd have a certain amount of resin in there, which you need to drain out. So they're purely to do with the construction of the model. If you're going to hollow out a model, you've got to put holes, and holes at either end. That's obviously the bottom of the barrel, because the top of the barrel, that hole there, is also a drain hole, but it's also the tap hole on the barrel. So what I've done with that is, here's one I made earlier. So there, oh, hang on, stop sharing again. There's, you see that? That's the bottom of the barrel with 3 drain holes in it. But the one on the top, I haven't painted these yet, but I just fill it in with a bit of filler and actually push the filler down a little bit so I can still use it as an obvious hole to look like a tap hole in the final thing. But yeah, that's there for drainage. So that's what they're there for.
You have to drain the resin out of it because it's ultraviolet activated. So if you didn't drain the resin out of it, it would never solidify inside the barrel. It would be liquid, or it can do strange things. I've seen it do strange things. So
it does expand up, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah, it does expand. Yeah.
And then so you suddenly find after 6 to 9 months your model's bursting open because of this resin. Yes. So not a good idea. So certainly hollow it or build it. I mean, the first of these barrels I did, because I'm everything I do, and you're probably the same, Peter, is you run a few samples off and then you run a few more because the cost of them is nothing. I think it's 10 pence a barrel in resin. So you run one or two of these off just to make sure it's right. And by the time you've finished, you've got hundreds of barrels all over the place, and you haven't actually printed one that's perfect yet. It was the same with the bites. I was awash with bites until quite recently. But the first barrels I did, I printed solid because, again, yes, of course, there's a difference in price, but not a huge amount, not something the size of a barrel. So you print those off solid just to make sure you got everything right, and then hollow the final version.
Yeah, I know what you said about the resin. My printer that I've got downstairs, it's not an Elegoo one, it's the other one, the other manufacturer.
Gosh, there's a few. Oh dear.
I've got an Elegoo fixing unit, you know, the one.
Oh, right, the wash, yeah, the wash curing
the wash
thing.
cure
Yeah.
thing. I can't remember what the name of it, but it's a big one, and it's got a big, it's got quite a big build plate.
Oh, right.
But it came with a very, very useful bit of software on it. And what I can do with mine is it prints off 8. What can you say? They're sort of like configuration things
Mm-hmm.
for your resin. So you put your resin in and it prints these 8
little test print
shapes off.
Yeah.
With different exposures. And what you do is when it finishes, you look at the 8 that you've got, and then according to which one is best, you look in the there's a file that goes with it, and that tells you what the exposure is for the resin, so that you look to see what the best print is. And then you use that to
gosh, that is helpful.
Exposure.
On mine, you just sort of start with something that you hope will work, and then after that you sort of fine tune and hone things. They come up with all sorts of well, you'll know this, that light sheet things got all sorts of settings and things for various resins, but as you say, that yours is going to be different from mine, is going to be different from everybody else's.
Oh, they're all even the same. I mean, you could get a bottle of the same type and it could be different. It's a little bit of a nightmare actually working it out, and until you get it sorted out, you will have a number of failures. You have to accept that you're going to have a number of failures.
Yes. But thankfully, it doesn't cost. It doesn't cost.
But it doesn't cost you. I mean, my bottle of resin was quite expensive. It was 40 quid for 1 litre, but it's a couple of years old now, and I've still got over half. Yeah, and I've printed loads of stuff with it, so you know, it's not all that expensive.
Have you got? I found that temperature is extremely critical. So I've got mine in a box, and in a sealed unit. I've taken the cover off it, mounted it in a box, and that's now got a little temperature controlled heater in it, and I keep it at 26 or just under 26 degrees.
I've never done that because it's in the dining room downstairs on Christina's old computer table. I've never had to do that, but I have heard that, you know, wide variations of temperature can have a big effect. I mean, our dining room is usually about 20-21 degrees, so it's not outrageously cold. But I know people who've put their printers in garages, for example, which haven't been heated, and have had a problem.
Oh yes, that was my first problem actually. I got this printer, mounted it in here with the layout, and started printing off, and everything was fine because it must have been the summer and the room was warm. Come the winter, I had loads of failures and I couldn't make out what it was, but it turned out to be this temperature thing, which is why it's downstairs and in a sealed box. I think you can get, because your printer, I wish I could remember the name of it, because there is another popular brand, but I can't think.
I can't remember it.
And you've got one.
Anycubic.
Oh, Anycubic. Yes, that's right.
It's an Anycubic.
Well, that's got a cover on it, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, yeah.
So I think you can get a little heater thing that goes in within the cover.
Yeah, the very latest ones that I've seen. I mean, mine's is like 5 or 6 years old now, but the latest ones I've seen have got inbuilt heating in
Yeah.
them. You can buy them with inbuilt heating now, and that's got to be a good thing, you know, because they've added it, because people have been experiencing problems. Moving on a little bit, just taking a little bit further.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason that you favour the resin that you favour, or do you use any that you fancy?
I've stuck, because I started with it and it works. I started using resin standard grey at one stage, and that was fine. It works well. It's ABS like one. They've actually come up with a revised ABS one, which is even better now. But I don't use either of those. I use water-based or water-washable ones.
Yeah.
And I had a problem, as I explained on the video. I think it's all right using water-washable resin, but what do you do with the water when you've washed it? You've got all this mucky water with resin, which is dangerous stuff. I mean, it's as dangerous as the IPA-based stuff. And what can you do with it? You've got this bucket of lethal water. That to me was a real problem. And so what I do now is I use water washable, but I actually wash it in IPA. So because it is IPA soluble too. So I take whatever it is off the build plate and put it in IPA resin, but that then goes in a plastic bag into a you see, words are failing me now. These electronic vibrating things that that doesn't sound at all right, sort of stuff. Oh, what are they called?
Ultrasonic.
Ultrasonic bath. Thank you very much, Dave. It goes into an ultrasonic bath. You can't put IPA in the ultrasonic bath directly because it tends to explode. So you put the IPA in a plastic bag, float that in water in the ultrasonic bath, and that really cleans the thing up nicely. It then comes out of that bag of IPA into a wash of IPA, and then it's rinsed under the tap, because IPA, you can rinse that away quite happily. That means all the residue, all the old resin, I can now clean out by just pouring it all into a bottle and leaving it in the sunlight.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and it then clears down.
Yeah,
but
I you can reuse what's left. It
absolutely
out.
Yeah.
This is all new to me, because my only experience with 3D printing, well, from a observer's point of view, I mean, I don't own a printer, is using filament, plastic filament, or whatever it's made of. I wasn't even aware that you could 3D print using liquid resin.
So this is a shunter that this is made out of filament. It's a bullied southern shunter. It's not a particularly successful print, but this was printed on the machine downstairs with PLA, and yeah, I mean it's okay, but it's not brilliant. I mean, I've used but I use the resin. The resin printers were really quite expensive when they first came out, but like most things like that, the price has dropped by a huge amount. I mean, mine was well under £500 when I bought it, and they've come down even more.
Well, yours is a bigger and better one than mine, but mine got a fairly small build plate on it, but that was 180 quid, I think.
Yeah, so they're not hugely expensive.
They're not hugely expensive.
So presumably on these resin printers, you don't have what's known as a hot end.
No.
Right. So it comes out. It literally comes out of the nozzle in liquid form.
No, it doesn't come out in a nozzle. It works the other way round. Chris, you explain to how a resin printer differs.
I was hoping I was going to have a quick slurp of coffee then. Go on. What the resin printer does is it builds up. I was saying about building it up on a sheet of paper. If you turn that piece of paper into a block of metal, and then turn it upside down, you can then hover that build plate over a vat of resin. So the build plate goes into the resin, and at the bottom of the vat is a transparent sheet, or near as damn it, it's a transparent sheet in the vat, but actually underneath the vat is a liquid crystal display, like a mobile phone display, but it's usually only a monochrome one. And what happens is when the build plate drops down, it hovers very slightly, I think 20 microns, 30 microns above the base of the vat. Then underneath the LCD display is an ultraviolet light source. That's then illuminated. So the image of that layer that we produced is then imprinted onto the resin. The resin then solidifies under that UV light.
Yeah.
And it fills in the gap between the bottom of the vat and the build plate. So you've then got on the bottom of the build plate your very first layer. The build plate then goes up, comes down again, and you repeat the process. And so you're building the thing up from bottom to top as you go along. So if you see a speeded up, I mean, it takes hours, but if you see a speeded up version of this thing, it's quite entertaining, because you see this build plate coming up, and this sort of whatever you've designed is forming out of the liquid as you're pulling it up. It's quite fun. So a completely different process from FDM.
You're using ultraviolet for the curing process, whereas on a filament printer,
it's just heat.
It just heats and then solidifies.
Heats it up. And
that's right. Yeah.
The resin is UV sensitive, which is why if you put what you rinse it in afterwards outside, the sun actually sets the resin out, the liquid, and you end up with, well, you can end up with a layer at the bottom or a weird shape inside.
Yeah.
Sort of solidifies up out the liquid, but
and then all you do is filter that, and you've got your
just
IPA
filter
back.
it out and reuse it again.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got a few John has said that he heats the build plate with a hairdryer before printing, but there is enough UV in it afterwards. That's quite a good tip.
There's actually, yes, it is.
I might actually try that. Christine,
give that a go.
Any number of hairdryers I can use.
You've got a wife too, yes.
Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions that they would like to ask Chris? They can unmute and ask anything about the basics of 3D printing. Anyone?
Well, I don't have a question, but I found it very informative indeed. And I have a CAD software myself, but it's not Fusion 360. I found it tough and hard. So I just found one which is a simple software, which is Blender. Have you heard of that software?
Yeah, Blender. Yeah, I've heard of that.
I've heard of that. I can never get my head around it, actually. That's interesting.
Yeah, Blender's very good, and I just wanted to have a bit of help, and I had a look on Blender, follow them on the social media. Then I joined into their Discord server for the help and things, and looking at the models, but not just trains, any example, but the community wasn't good enough for me, so I left the Blender Discord server.
All right.
So yeah,
I'm all right on Fusion 360. I wouldn't pretend for a minute to know an awful lot about it. I know enough to be able to design the sort of things that you've seen. And each new design is a new learning curve, because you find out some other tool that you can use. But one thing Fusion is great for things that have got circles, squares, and you can do all sorts of fancy shapes as well. But I don't think you could ever attempt to do a human, because there's just too many lines going in different directions. And I think it's things like Blender that come into their own on that sort of area.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Box is recommended for slicing, obviously.
Yeah.
I got that. I editor's favorites on their website.
Uh-huh. Chitterbox is by far the most common one. I think that's the most familiar one. But I've got a friend that lives down the road with a 3D printer. He uses Chitterbox. But I've just found actually an awful lot easier and friendlier to use. But it's each to their own again. It's a bit like the FDM versus resin argument, really. That's horses for courses. I couldn't print off what Peter's just shown you on my resin printer because it just isn't big enough.
Yeah.
So an FDM is ideal for that sort of thing, loco bodies and wagons and things. I can just get this. I've 3D printed that on my resin printer.
The brake van.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I printed it in sections. The base is actually in 2 halves. The roof comes off, but the main body of it just fits on my build plate. But that's I suppose I could have done it on its end, but I didn't. I actually did it at 30 degrees, of course.
Now it looks like that is fixable. That is.
Oh yeah, yes it is. Yes, it's possible to do it. But really, resin printers come into their own with things like this little bike. I mean, you couldn't do that on an FDM printer, but you can do on a resin. So it's whatever you want to do with it, really.
That's one simple model for the beginners.
The bike.
Yeah, but what I found out is a bit simple is but I mentioned I've been on an evening with session since January when James did the 3D printing session on the milk churn that he has done.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's very good. I assume you have seen that before.
No, I haven't seen that one. Everything I've learned about Fusion, I've picked up from stuff on YouTube. In fact, everything I've learned about all sorts of things I've picked up from stuff on YouTube. It's invaluable. But there's always something. Excuse me. There's always something else you want to learn about. You sit here. I'd sit here for quite some time thinking, now, how on earth can I do that? How can I draw that? And eventually you come up with a solution. So it's a way of keeping the brain going.
There's a guy on YouTube, an American bloke who I followed, and he taught me the rudiments of using Fusion 360. View 360 is Network Rail's media tool. Sorry, it's both similar, so I'm getting all into that. But I followed him. There's a really good sequence of YouTube videos if you want to get into Fusion 360 and you're not quite sure how to go. He takes you through it step by step, so you're not overloaded from the start. And it's a little bit counterintuitive when you start using. You sort of think, well, why does it work like that? But once you've got used to it, and he takes you through it in nice little bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
And you can make things up easily. I mean, I did it. I made some things. I haven't got any examples here, but like for the SR 7mm group, Ian drew up the signal heads for Great Victoria Street using Fusion 360.
Yeah.
And well, I had a little bit of a problem printing them, but he gave them to Michael Davies, and he printed them because I just didn't have the time to sort it out. But they were printed, and you can't tell that they're 3D printed once they're painted and everything.
That's right.
They're fantastic, and that is what resin printers are great for. The sort of small detail things and everything, not printing a
Guys, could I butt in here for a second?
Go on, Alan. Yeah,
it's a very interesting discussion. I'm in Australia.
Yes.
So I'm a little bit away from everything else, but I've been working in 3D printing for about 15 years now. Used to teach it at our TAFE colleges here.
Well, I'm going to keep quiet now, Alan.
Sorry?
I'm going to keep quiet, Alan. You know what you're talking about.
You what?
You know what you're talking about, Alan.
You don't know what we're talking about?
No, you know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't know whether you can see this, but I have here one of my FDM
printed models. All right, done on an ABS printer, and we don't like using PLA out here. It doesn't last. So everything is done with ABS. And while that's
need
not
to come
perfect,
a bit closer to your camera, Al.
You've just disappeared into your
closer?
background.
Oh, you've gone into your
is that all right?
No, you're blending in with your background too much.
Oh, okay. I don't know whether you can see that on yours or not. It's a bit hard.
It's because it's green, Alan. It keeps
Right. Okay.
blending you into your virtual background.
You carry on for a minute. I'll take the virtual background off so that it makes it easier to work. All right. Now I've got to remember where to go for background.
It's somewhere in advanced
You
video.
can also use an LMS logo that's red.
No, it's not. It's a GWR logo, and it is green, as you quite rightly pointed out.
Are you talking to us on a PC or some? Are you talking
no, PC?
A PC, right? So if you want to remove your screen background, down in the bottom left, you've got stop video, and there is a little arrow against that. If you click on that,
Yeah.
in the bottom, there's there's 3 boxes in the
video
bottom.
settings.
Yeah, video settings. It says choose virtual background. If you click on that, you should get an option that says none.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Video. Yeah. With background. There we go. Background. None.
That's better.
That's great.
That's better. Okay. All right. So, can you see that, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's the logo. Most of you would have been familiar with what it is. That is all FDM printed. Okay.
Including the chassis.
Now, sorry?
Including the chassis, or is that metal?
Including the chassis. The chassis, if you look under there, the 2 side frames of the chassis are 3D printed. It has horn blocks, Slater's horn blocks, and Slater's running gear and motor inside it. Runs like a charm. And it's all DCC operated as well. So I design the chassis myself. I do all the drawing design work myself. So there's the logo. There's the tender. The tender was actually the most problematic part. And I had to do a lot of finishing work on that one. But I am working in resin as well. This is one that I've got on the go at the moment. Oops, come back a bit. There we go.
Yeah.
So I'm doing a 44 XX in resin. Now that was printed on an Anycubic Mono X 6X or Mono X 6K, sorry. Boilers and everything were done vertically. Body was printed separately. So the firebox and boiler, that was all printed vertically, and then it's all put together after that. The chassis on that one, believe it or not, are actually laser cut plywood. They will be acrylic eventually, but at the moment they're laser cut. It does run, funnily enough. Motors and everything are in it, as you can see. And when it comes to slicing, I simply use proprietary software provided by the printer companies. And I find that does the job perfectly adequately for me. I've used some of the programs you've talked about. I don't know. I like a simple life. I find them overly complicated. And that's why I use the proprietary stuff. It also depends on the printer a little bit. Now, I'm using Anycubic with the resin because the price over here is brilliant. We can buy a full-blown 6K resin printer here for about $600. Works out about 300 quid. I don't know how that compares with what you guys pay there.
Paid a bit more for mine. Yeah. I've got the Anycubic Mono X 4K, which is the older one.
Yeah.
But because I've had it for a long time, it was proportionally more expensive than that.
Well, when I bought mine, they were doing a deal.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for a deal. So I got mine for about 600. and that's a 6K. And it is definitely better than the 4K. The quality of the print and the finish on the print is way better. But with the FDM machines, I use UP up, or the tier time printers. I've used Enders, MakerBots, all sorts of other manufacturers, and basically I've sold them all and gone back to the tier time, because the tier time produces the quality that I'm looking for. And I use 3D printing for absolutely everything. My layout, most of the buildings are 3D printed or have some 3D printing in them. I'm currently building a model of Sydney Central Station. That is laser cut frame, resin overlays, 3D filament 3D printed parts as well. Right, so that's taking me, I've been working on that for 2 years now. I'm getting close to just about getting it ready to go where it's going to actually be used. But I do all my own drawing, and I was interested to hear what you said about Fusion. I'm afraid I don't get on with Fusion at all. I just don't like it. Because I used to teach, I used to use Autodesk Inventor. They woke up to the fact I retired, cut me off from my license, and then said, look, you can have your license back for $3,800 a year.
Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me.
Which I promptly said,
yeah,
no way.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I've gone to SolidWorks, who do a very good, extremely good copy of a drawing software, which has all the assembly functions in it, which is what I really need, because I test everything before I even make it to make sure it works. So with SolidWorks, there is a cost involved, but it's about $170 a year, which I think works out somewhere around about £80. I feel that's reasonable to pay a year for a program that has all the functionality of a fully fledged engineering production program. And that's, well, I think it's $99 US they sell it for. So that's a very, very good program, and it has huge capability in what you can do with it. It took me a while to get my head around it, because I've been using Inventor for 20 odd years, and they name things very differently. So I had to rethink how I did that. But that was about 12 months ago. I think I've got it licked now, so I'm into that. So yeah, it's just been interesting listening to what you've been saying. So I can't get on with Fusion, particularly the hobbyist version, because I just don't have enough files to work with. I mean, there's over 40 files just in that, and it's not finished yet.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alan. I struggle using Fusion 360, but I have so many other things to do that I can't devote the time to actually getting more familiar with it. So I use other things. I can't remember what it's called. There is an online one that you can use, which sort of, if you want to create a relatively simple shape for printing, you can do it sort of on a for free. I can't remember what it's called now. What 3D you've got the X6K. What was your PLA? Or you don't use PO? What's your other printer? Your filament printer?
I have a UP300. That's a tier time filament printer, and I have a UP Mini as well.
Right.
They're both fully enclosed. Sort of the case is completely enclosed. The 300 is all steel, a really rigid, really strong setup. I don't like open case, particularly with ABS, because you get too much problem with curl and lifting off the table. But if you've got a fully enclosed case and it stays nice and warm inside, ABS is absolutely brilliant to work with. The problem with PLA in Australia is, because I do a lot of Gauge 1 stuff that runs outside. In fact, all my Gauge 1 locos are 3D printed. It breaks down in about 12 months. You know, you'll go out 12 months later, and you'll put your hand right through the side of the loco because the PLA just breaks down in the sun because it's plant-based.
Yeah.
And it's got no body to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have that problem in Canada as well, Alan. Is if you leave it out on the track in the summer, you're going to find a big blobber when you go in at tea time. So I tend to not to leave them out in the summer. I'm a bit careful about that. And that's gauge 1 as well, incidentally. But I'm still getting into 3D printing. Right at 72, I've got myself a small end, whatever PLA thing, and I use Cura as a slicer, but it's all like new to me. I can't get my head around the jargon people use when they're talking to you. And I watch a video on something, and there'll be some young lad there talking so fast I can't understand. I can't keep up with what he's talking about. I give up in the end. So as a bit of a dinosaur, I'm interested to see. I'm fascinated by the resin printing. That sounds far better than what I'm using at the moment. But stuff I print is all flat, flat panel sides which I glue together. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see. I'd like to get more into it more because as my eyes get worse, my sausages turn into sausages. It's harder to do scratch building the way I used to.
So I use Cura for my printer, and I found it's easy to use.
It is easy. Yes, it is. Yeah, I found that, and I'm actually using a thing called FreeCAD for the drawing.
Oh, ouch!
Yeah.
I think whichever one you
I'm
go,
sorry,
you've got to stick with it.
I know you're an expert, Alan. I'm a
newbie
here.
For my sins, I've worked as an engineer most of my life. So,
Okay, right. Well, I've been an artist, so I'm more of a freestyler than.
I looked at FreeCAD and went, no way.
No.
And look, that's just me. I mean, that's my past experience talking there. The comments made earlier about printing figures, though, resin is definitely the way to go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know whether you guys know about Model U's Patreon page.
No, don't know that one.
Model U, you're probably familiar with the company.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They have a Patreon page on YouTube. You can join up to that. Now, you all know how expensive Model U models are. You get 5 models a month for £7.
Oh, those are the little figures.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 to 43s. You get.
Yeah.
He sends you files for 1 to 43, 1 to 76, and a full size file, which I turn into whatever I want for gauge 1 or 7/8 scale or whatever. And you get 5 of those every month. It's $14 here in Australia, so that's about £7. It's brilliant. If you bought those models, you're looking at what? A minimum £3.50, or possibly closer to £5 per model. You went and bought them as £25. And once you've got them, of course, you can print them as many times as you like.
What was the page again, Alan?
It's called, it's Model U's Patreon page. Go onto Model U's site, and he's got links there how to get onto it.
Patreon, did you say?
Patreon, yeah. Patron. Or Pateron, sorry. Go onto Model U's site. He's got links there on how to get onto it. And I'll say 5 models per month. You get an initial set of, I think it's 5 or 6 models as an introduction, and you can choose whatever you want. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of 1950s, 60s stuff because I've got an O-gauge model of Helston in the south of England, which I'm still finishing. I am starting to show it now, but you know how a model is, a layout is, you never really finished, eh?
No.
Yeah, no.
I'm still adding to it. So,
And when you
Yeah.
think it's finished, it gets rebuilt.
Yeah, well, you think it's finished, you look and see, oh, there's another bit of detail I should have put in there. And that's where the 3D printing's coming in. So all of my figures I'm printing myself for the whole layout. I mean, I'm going to have something like about 50 or 60 figures on there by the time I've finished. And, that's a lot of money to invest if you're buying the models individually.
Mm.
So if you can print them yourself, you can duplicate some stuff by painting them differently. Same figure, different paint job. You don't really see, particularly if you've got on either end of the model. The layout doesn't make any difference. So resin is great for figures. There's no two ways about it. FDM, which is the filament stuff, doesn't really work for figures. I've tried it and I've used it, but it just, like Guy said earlier, young fella, as Alex mentioned earlier, it's too grainy. But yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to take over.
No, that's
No, I'm glad you
fine. I
did.
mean, anyone. No,
Yeah.
there's
I'm
lots
glad
of
you
good
did.
stuff there, and
Yeah.
it's going to be it's recorded and it will go out afterwards. So any kind of information like that will go down well. It is a big thing, and there is such a large span between people's experience with this stuff. You've got all right. I sort of dabble. But Chris is doing more, and yourself, you're doing more. Your 3D printing locomotive. Chris is doing his buildings. It is the kind of thing that people would like to get more involved in if they had a reassurance about what they can do with it. Because let's face it, not a lot of people have time for experimentation to get it right. They would prefer to start from a reasonable point and then refine that as they go on. They don't want to go out and spend a couple of £100 on a bit of kit and then £50-60 on resin and all the other bits and pieces that ideally you need, and then get disenchanted with it, because it is quite a big to do it that way is a big expenditure.
I would suggest to anybody who wants to get into 3D printing, if you're a tall handy with a computer, get into teaching yourself. And somebody mentioned earlier about YouTube. YouTube is an absolute goldmine of information. If you get the student copy of, say, SolidWorks, you also get access to all their training materials for free. So that gives you an opportunity to do an awful lot of learning. And Peter, don't worry, you've only got a couple of years on me anyway. So you'll get it.
It's doing it with all the. I mean, I still work full time as well, so it's not. It's a little bit.
Poor boy.
Well,
I probably started the same age when Peter, when I was the same age as Peter, but I've made it to 76 so far and still going. Still keeping above ground, as somebody said.
It'll keep your brain working and it stops you going. I've got a friend who's got pancreatic cancer who was supposed to have died 2 years ago, and he's still going strong. The hobby will keep you going. So it's don't despair if you're a bit older. You can do it.
What
Chris,
got
were
me
you
into
going
it?
to say something?
I was going to say what got me into it was I like to put lights in things. I've got, actually, if I just fire up this Steve thing and show you I've got another camera here. There we go. And if I show you the other camera, it will show you this is what got me started. Let me do another share.
So it looks like you've got the same good shed that I've got downstairs, except mine is pale blue.
Oh, is it? I'm now looking for the wrong thing. Oh, I don't want to share at all. Sorry, I've got the wrong button. I was an engineer once, electronics. You wouldn't believe it, would you?
So was I.
There we go. Now you see those buildings over there? They've all got They're only half depth. They've all got
Yeah,
lights in them. And I put lights in them and then realised I was lighting up an empty room. So I thought, that's a bit of a blow. What can I do about that? So I thought, well, I'm going to put some furniture in, and that's what started me going. So I've built beds, I've built bathrooms. There's a bath, a toilet in there, sideboard, tables, chairs, all sorts of stuff, all to go in these houses. And then when I'd done that, it was I got into things like this little boiler, which has now found itself, little stove thing, found itself into the coal office and guards vans and things. So I've sort of migrated from the furniture business into railways, really. But once you've got a printer, you look at your layout and think, do you know, I could do with such and such. And to me, the great thing is, and I'm sure you'll agree, is that you look at something, just have an idea, and you can yourself convert it from an idea to something physical on your layout. You don't need to buy anything at all. Well, you do, but you know, nothing in that process. So it really is. It's a great creative thing to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I love doing it. It's just a shame that I don't really have more time to do it.
Oh, you'll retire one day, Peter. Don't worry about it.
Don't dangle that carrot, Chris. Well, hopefully I will. But I mean, I've just changed my job in Network Rail. I am no longer a signalman, which is what I've been for 15 years. I've now got 437 signalers that I've got to train. So it's like I'm 60 on Monday. It's my birthday. I've got to go back to school again at 60 to learn how to do all this, and it's a bit of a nightmare. I haven't got time to do anything. Jeff is whinging like hell because I have not been over to his place for months now because I'm working during the week and having to learn a new skill set. So, which is why I got View 360 confused with Fusion 360.
There's too much going on in your brain. That's the trouble.
Too much, yeah, and the brain capacity has shrunk a little bit. Anyway, that we've had our hour session. Has anyone got any other comments to make? And all I can say to all of you is thank you very much for your contribution. It's been a very, very good session, and there is definitely food for thought, and there's definitely scope for more programs, more help, more anything to do with 3D printing, because, all right, there are not too many here today, but I'm sure that the videos will be watched to death afterwards. So anyone got another comment before I sign off?
No, just to say thank you
very much.
Well, all I can say to all of
thanks,
you again, Chris, Alan, Peter, Dave, Alex, and the others who are drifting away now, thank you for this more than worthy session on 3D printing, and enjoy the rest of the show.